Okay, great. Well, thanks for the intro, and yeah, thanks for making a different time for the talk. Actually, I looked back at my slides and my photos in Barcelona and found that the last time I was here in UPF was in March 2016, so 10 years ago, my last time here. So it's nice to be back. Yeah, so I'm Professor of Creative Computing at the University of Arts London. If you haven't heard of the University of Arts London, it is number 2 in the world for art and design, 7 years in a row now. And it's Europe's largest art and design university, so it's very fun to be there. And I like this quote from Grayson Perry, who used to be our chancellor, who says that the University of Arts of London is the world's biggest factory for making trouble. So our job is to go out and make trouble. Okay. So that's a bit about the university, and I come from the Creative Computing Institute. So we set up a institute for computing in the art university, and we focus very much on interdisciplinary teaching and research. So looking at creativity, AI, human and computer interaction, big data, VR, and robotics with a strong social mission. And my own research, yeah, it's human-centered AI, I would say. And what I'm really interested in looking at the moment is how people interact with technologies in creative settings, and especially how they are using how creative practitioners using AI in their creative practice and how it changes their creative practice. And yeah, so my earliest work with AI and music was back in 2008 when one of my students was looking at Turing tests for drummers, so whether a drummer could tell the difference between drum tracks and AI-generated drum tracks and metronome-based drum tracks. So yeah, so it's 2008, and I guess that was the second wave of AI, and now we're in the third wave, the sort of deep learning one. So what am I going to talk about? I'll give a bit of background about some of the human-computer interaction research that I do, especially around future music, which I think would be more of interest here. And then talk a little bit about responsible AI for the arts, and then round off with talking about this work I've been doing with people in rural China with embroidery and generative AI and practice generative AI that I'm interested in. So 20 years of art and technology exploration. So I'm really interested in experiences which are fun, creative, reflective, engaging, and they're often sort of thought-provoking questions, challenging existing practices. So future music, my earliest work there was 2003, where I was working on sort of networked music. So iPhones came later, but initially it started off with web-based music composition and looking at how people created music across the web and how we could manage the issues of latency and lack of understanding of what each other's doing when you're remotely connected. So building like questionnaires, doing studies of how people interacted over time, heat maps of interaction, these kind of things, and looking for points at which people engaged with each other, like where they actually creatively sparked with each other. And also built some two-person musical instruments, which you might have seen. I think this one wasn't so long, maybe 2016, actually. So this was Ben Bangler and Fiore Martin made this two-person granular synth, very cool, fun kind of instrument, which we then took out and tested around East End of London, on the streets of East End of London, just getting people to interact and play with it, and doing various sort of interactive performance studies. And what we're interested in is if you've got a two-person granular synthesizer, how do you interact and how do you encourage the engagement between the people with that synthesizer? And we'd sort of built it purposefully quite close to each other. So for English people, it's a little bit awkward to stand that close. So we sort of made people stand quite close. And it was quite fun. And we did a lot of these street-based evaluation settings. You can see my amazing mustache there from 10 years ago. And also performance events. And of course, then Ben Mengler built three-person music instruments, which also went to Sonar. And we also looked at how that might happen in virtual reality, so multi-person instruments in virtual reality. So hopefully this one will have some audio. So what we're interested in there is not just the audio, but how people position things in space when they don't have any physical constraints. So you can move objects anywhere. And so we mapped out different mappings of how people interacted. So whether some people chose to do it sort of facing each other, some people did side by side, or like a performance in a band, this kind of thing. And we looked at how different ways of representing each other's music and different ways of transmitting the audio changed their interaction together. And then we also looked at wearable instruments. So this is Ty Mainstone's work. So wearable technology that generates sound in live performance. And also looking at how we can convey music emotion through vibration for people who may be hard of hearing or deaf and so on, and trying to convey the mood music from movies through wearable devices. So that's a lot of maybe 20 years of research into future music technologies. I also did working with, for the last 10 years, with people in China looking at different forms of intangible cultural heritage. So, for example, here, Central Conservatory Music, they have this interesting instrument called Du Chang Ching, which is a single-stringed instrument, and you play it basically with harmonics. I found it very hard to play. Anyway, so we looked at how that could be reimagined with different forms of technology. So take a group of designers to China and immerse ourselves in those settings, and then think about what might be ways to reimagine this instrument. So here, for example, augmenting the instrument so that it could trigger you could play in real time multiple delayed recordings of the string, if that makes sense. So you could then make a polyphonic Du Chang Ching, which is something that the local practitioners were interested in, something easier to play for kids, and something kind of crazy interpretation of octaves. And then having a performance event to kind of demonstrate the kind of things that we're making there. So the other aspect, another aspect of this kind of social interaction projects, social innovation projects in rural China is working, something I've been doing again for 10 years or so, which I'll come back to at the end, working with the Khmer minority in sort of central China. And so they have a lot of projects that document cultural heritage in that region. And I was interested in how we could do a co-creation process with them. So mapping a co-creation onto a local style of design practice, and then creating interactive technologies. So for example, interactive products or interactive performances. So here's a lamp that we created. So the lamp has recordings from the local village, and also the patterns from the local village, and then we create this interactive product with the idea that potentially it would be sellable within the village to tourists and this kind of thing. So trying to generate some value in the local area. And then we also had this one, which was quite interesting in terms of it collected stories, and you could play different parts of the stories by twisting different parts of the element. But this object is reflecting some of the traditional hanging decorations that they have in the village. And then the final section I was just going to mention in sort of background is work on designing for play. So again, music instruments, but this time designed for children with different abilities, so special educational needs. So in this case, this was Dave Meckin's work on a robot that could play the xylophone, a robot that plays the guitar, a robot that plays drums. And then we use those devices with kids that had very low ability or very low cognitive skills. And so, for example, here's an example in the classroom of Dave working in that setting. And you can see we've got two kids here. And the thing I find great about this is, so this child's interacting with this iPad, and essentially he's got two parts that you can touch, and then that will trigger the guitar, and this kid has got some soft interface that he's interacting with. And the thing that's great about this is it was the first time that the children had been able to play musical instruments because they didn't have the physical strength to play a guitar, for example. And it would be the first time that they'd created music together with somebody else. So there's quite, to me, that's a very powerful use of technology, really. And then the second one is Antonella Nones, who worked with these fabrics. She built these large fabric objects And each of these nodules here is essentially a touch-based interaction. So when you touch it, it triggers sound. And we were interested in how the kids interacted with these objects. These children have autism and often are non-verbal, so they don't communicate verbally. And they, what we're interested in was if we create these objects that are sound-based, will they interact and sort of interact in ways together, and how do they interact? So we did a lot of evaluation, video recordings, and so on. And then finally, designing for social engagement. So this is another one of my students, Sarah Heitlinger. So we were working on an urban farm in London and looking at how we could collect information about plants and so on and convey that to people. So she created this watering can, which has a speaker in it, and it would tell stories about the plants as you water them, give you information. So rather than having a visual interface, it was very spoken word interaction. And then we created a sensor network, which could track the different temperatures that people were growing things in. And finally, a tangible seed library where people could share stories about where the seeds came from their country and how they grew it in London and what it was used for, if it was used for medicine or different kind of uses. So again, the focus here was moving away from screen-based interaction and thinking about sound. So that's a little recap on a little summary on the sort of 20 years of design practice that I do around interactive arts and cross-cultural design. And really, I think of it as essentially inspiration-led design. So I'm interested in pushing the boundaries of what the design can be. It's not really requirements-driven. Nobody comes and says, oh, I really need a seed library that talks to me in my local farm. It's more about how do we use these ways of design practice to explore questions of people's social engagement, or how do we use them to encourage kids with different abilities to interact together. So I just wanted to give that as a sort of context for where I'm coming from. And then the next two parts of the talk, one is about responsible AI for the arts, and then the other one is about the Praxis generative AI. So this responsible AI for the arts stuff is work that I started maybe about 5 years ago. And I noticed, well, I think everybody's noticed. So the challenge is that the AI models getting bigger and bigger, harder and harder to understand. And the issue with this is it makes it very hard for us to understand how the AI model works, why it was made, the decisions it did, where the training data came from. And so this also changes the creative process. So the lack of transparency, the lack of control, these biased generative AI models actually change the way that people engage in creative practice, change the way that they're interacting with these tools. So for example, stable audio can make amazing trance music if you want, but if you try and ask it to do, so this is my little example, I'm sure you don't notice. So it makes amazing. So that's great. But then if you ask it to do something else, so we tried to get it to do some upbeat music in Chinese style. Okay, I've got to stop it. It's painful. So I'm sure you're all aware of that here. But the problem is that because it's at the edges of the training data, you could hear it sort of trying to make the Chinese music somehow sort of Irish folk music or something was going on there. I don't know what was happening. So I'm really interested in those edge cases where, okay, we want to generate stuff that's not in the mainstream center of the training data. So the vision is really thinking about more responsible AI for the arts. So think about empowering creativity, making it more explainable, more meaningfully controlled. And one of the ways that I've been working on that is building this explainable AI for the arts manifesto. So we published this last year at Kai, actually, the same conference I was just at just now. And so it's a collaboration between several researchers. And what we're interested in is explainable AI, how does that apply to the arts? So explainable AI tends to be very much about productivity-oriented things, like how do I make it clearer why an AI system has made a certain prediction about my mortgage valuation, these kind of things. But what about other ways of interacting with AI? How do we use explainable AI in arts? How might we use arts to explain AI? These kind of questions. And so there are these interrelated areas that are very, let's say, vaguely defined, and it's problematic, right? So human-centered AI, I would say it's a broader thing. We've got responsible AI and explainable AI. And the way I see it is human-centered AI is sort of about human well-being, being responsible, human-centered design, that kind of aspects. Responsible AI is more about how you actually do that. So for explainability, fairness, robustness, and so on. And then explainable AI is how we actually implement it in software. So these three relate together in my mind anyway. The human-centered AI is really the big picture, like the grand challenges. The responsible AI is more like policy. And then explainable AI is implementation. How do we actually build that into software systems? So in many ways, the explainable AI part is the hardest part, because how do you actually make an AI model that's more transparent, or how do you convey what impact the model has on the environment, for example? So the Explainable AI Manifesto came from this international community, and we were interested in what is the role of explainable AI as an artistic material? How could the arts be used to explain AI, and so on? And in our original manifesto, which kind of looked like this, there was a lot of different ideas going on. So we eventually managed to get this into a coherent set of themes. So the core themes, which I'll just go through some examples are, so thinking about the important things for explainable AI for the arts is about openness, valuing artistic practice for explainability, so not just thinking that everything needs to be functional explanations, focusing on empowerment, inclusion, and fairness, and recognizing the value of glitches and hacking systems and how that can contribute to explanation. So let's look at openness. So we were particularly interested in how do we increase the interdisciplinarity of explainable AI research. Like I said, it's mostly very functional, very much about how do we quantify what is happening in the models, but we can be more open. We can have open collaborations, open toolkits, and so on. So in terms of like the kinds of papers we looked at, we had a project that surveyed in 2025 survey of AI music models, and we had 26 models that we surveyed, and we found that most of them, unfortunately, were closed. They were very difficult to use, very difficult to understand what was happening, how they could be used. So we have this survey here, and as I'll talk about later, that led to the building of a repository for AI models where we tag them with different features that they have. And I think it'd be great if, I don't know if people are building AI models here. Yeah, sure you are. It'd be great to add some to that repository as well. Let's get those ones. So what I'm mostly interested in from the sort of responsible AI aspect is how we can use small AI models to do specific tasks, make them open, but also make it so that artists can train the models themselves on their own data sets, which I think is what you're doing as well. And also how we can use AI, for example, to create more meaningful taxonomies of existing small data sets. So the problem of how do you find the data? And we have a new project just started, which is looking at federated data commons. So how we can take small data sets and federate them for training, while still artists are able to retain control of their data set and attribution. So that's a project that Phoenix Perry is leading with NYU, Phoenix Perry at UAL. And so that'd be great too.
Sorry, what do you mean by federate?
So if we're thinking about training, rather than putting all the training data together into one place, we might federate it across. I have some training data, you have some, and we use it in a way that we control what's happening with the data when it goes into the training. And we don't all upload to the same cloud. We have it federated across our own resources for the training purposes. But the issue is how to do that and how to manage that with different regulatory settings. So we're doing it initially between the UK and the US to try and explore how that will relate to the different concepts of copyright in the two countries, and how we then create mechanisms that artists can use to express what their data sets could be used for in terms of training and what they can't be used for. Yeah, so that's just starting now. Should be a 12, 15-month project. Yeah, and like I said, what we found in this community that we built, which has maybe we had over 100 people coming to our workshops and so on, is that they were interested in finding data sets, but actually they were more interested to find AI models that they could use, open models. And so we built, okay, you could go to Hugging Face, right, and look at Hugging Face and do a search. But if you're a musician with, without a degree in computer science or a PhD in computer science, going to Hugging Face isn't really going to help you very much finding the models that you want. So we started building this open editable list of AI models, and also creating some guides for how people could deploy them and how they could use them in their own practice. And we start roughing them as well. So we have this thing called modelexplorer.musicology.org, and in there we can see different models. We have different tags, and then we can find out, oh, is it free? Does it work in real time? Is it open source, kind of trained from scratch, or does it come? Is it not able to be trained from scratch? And so we've been building that, and I think now we have over 30 models in there, and so we're looking for more people to add models to those. So ideally, these would be models that would run on a personal computer. Don't need to have. And I see this as a sort of repository. I suppose you could think of it like a version of Freesound of the AI models, right? So it's trying to make that tagging process more community based. Okay, so that's important. It'd be great if we can get some collaboration going on that. And then another aspect of the manifesto is talking about valuing artistic practice for explainability. So thinking about not just, oh, we're going to have a dashboard that explains, how many parameters this model uses and where the data's come from, but thinking about, well, let's use artist in residence programs or AI art exhibitions. So for example, here, this is a project by Lizzie Wilson, who's at UAL, and she was working with somebody who was using performance dance to convey how different aspects of the AI model were working, neural audio synthesis models. And we've also commissioned a number of artists ourselves to do performances using small models to demonstrate what's possible. Okay, that. And okay. And then think about how do we demystify the AI? How do we make it more transparent to people? So a lot has happened actually since 2001. So we now have these interfaces like Firefly, which have a lot of controls on them. That's great. But they're sort of more framed as stylistic, like Photoshop type controls. So they don't actually give you control of what the AI model does. They're working with this metaphor of essentially Photoshop. And then you've got things like Comfy UI, which is also awesome, but it requires some technical skill to get working with and to use that. So how do we try and build these interfaces that are more explainable AI, that focus on the model and exposing aspects of the model? So I'm guessing that most people know the VAE system from Patty and Ledge, Measure VAE or Music VAE, where they encode and they have a latent vector, in this case 256, and they have a decoder which will generate music that is coming from the latent vector. Oh, and then they have this visualization of different aspects of the vector. So they did some, what was interesting is that they did some semantic regularization. So the first 4 dimensions of the latent vector could be regularized to features such as arithmetic complexity or note variation, these kind of things. And then we can actually visualize within the vector different aspects, like where is there more examples of musical complexity, or where are there more examples of rhythmic diversity in these different vectors? And then it would generate pieces. And so we then use that and turn that into plugins that we could use in, for example, Max MSP, or sort of mock-ups of more live coding type interfaces. And so what we're interested in there is how do we design the interface to be more intuitive to a musician? So when they're exploring this space, what are they actually interested in? Okay. So I will just skip through a couple of these. So a recent project on responsible AI and music was looking at bringing together case studies of how it's used. So a few different people in those case studies exploring artists that still rely on physical storage. So these are people that just have banks of hard drives that don't put anything in the web. How can they use AI models for their own work? Lizzie Wilson looking at collaborative agents for live coding. Andre from the Philippines was interested in how do you generate music in a certain style in the Philippines when, again, like the Chinese music, it's very outside the dominant music styles. Okay, and I'm going to skip the hacking and glitches one, just to say that I think there's a lot of power in trying to be able to capture and reuse glitches that happen in artistic performance. And a lot of musicians we talk to are like, well, I kind of like it when the AI makes weird stuff, and how do I catch that, and how do I reuse that in my practice? So, for example, Terence Broad from CCI does network bending, or leads in network bending. So where he goes in and actually manipulates the model itself to generate different visual effects. So these would be the kind of visual materials that he would be creating. And then I think this is the final part of this one. So transparency and surprise. So there's a tension, right, when you're a creative practitioner working with explainable AI. So explainable AI would say we want everything to be more transparent, everything to be more clear what's happening. But as an artist, you often want to be surprised or delighted or confused by the output. So there's a tension there. And I think that's an interesting design tension to explore in terms of music making. So I developed a practice called incongruous design strategies. So what happens when we use AI outside its intended use cases? How do people misappropriate or appropriate these kind of ways in their creative practice? So we looked at this music bee, which was trained on Irish folk music. So let's see, we've got examples there. Okay, I'm going to play the full example. So we have an input MIDI, which sounds like that, and then we go through the measure BAE system, and we can navigate through the visual representation of 4 regularized dimensions, and then it'll produce some MIDI output, which is a variation on the original theme. That's great if you want to make Irish folk music, but supposing you're in a punk band, well, how do you use that in that setting? So let's see if this. So we've got a punk band and then also a glitch musician, and both of them use the same generative AI system. And we were interested in, I was interested in, okay, if they use this thing that's producing Irish folk music, but in these different contexts, how do they reflect on that in their practice? Let's have a listen and see if we can hear these ones. The punk language. So in those two cases, they're both using the generative AI model trained on Irish folk music. Obviously, the punk is going to be closer because folk music is going to have some melodies from that. But you can see the glitch music is really quite different in terms of what they've done. And they've actually essentially extracted the rhythmic variations in the music that it was generating for the Irish folk and turned that into part of their glitch performance. So what does doing this actually tell us about designing AI systems? So for me, it helped us to explore different questions that are very prominent in the field at the moment. So thinking about the ambiguity of AI, how do we think about that? How do we think about trustworthiness of AI? And how might AI also offer a sort of critical angle on what we're doing as practitioners? So, for example, the musicians talked about the AI being hungry. So they kept on saying it kept on wanting more and more data, right? So they had to put more and more data in to get anything that they felt actually resembled their kind of style. So there was this sort of power dynamic that they felt that it was constantly needing to be fed with music. So for me, the value of doing this kind of approach is exaggerating the frictions that people find with AI systems. So really, rather than trying to make something that is more useful, we're trying to make something that is somehow less useful or more confusing, to try to exaggerate those problems that people face with generative AI systems. Okay, so just to sum up there about the Explainable AI Manifesto, the aim is really to try and bridge the gap between technologists and artists. So think about how do we demystify and humanize AI, and really building this manifesto that's open for comments and development over time. So like I said, I find through doing that practice, there's a lot of design tension. So we, on one hand, Explainable AI wants transparency, but musicians and creative people often want surprise. And we want meaningful control as an Explainable AI category, but maybe as a musician, I just want to be able to influence the system. I don't want to directly control everything it does. On one hand, Explainable AI would say we want to be able to mitigate the bias, but if I'm building my own data sets, they're obviously biased because they're my data set. And Explainable AI talks a lot about explanation, maybe very functional explanations, but a lot of musicians and artists rely on intuition or to understand what's happening. So at the moment, it seems to me we're mostly relying on intuition. We're quite surprised by the outputs, and we're focused more on sort of influence. There's not so much meaningful control or transparency about what these AI systems are doing. So the sort of design opportunities are about moving out towards these edges, really. So trying to make stuff that's more meaningful control, but also is surprising. So the culmination of that sort of project was really this call to action we had about prioritizing small, personal, curated data sets, focusing on the use of low resource or specialized AI models, and also trying to challenge dominant AI discourses. So the sort of things that major companies are talking about, where they say that models must get bigger and bigger, and you must, upload all your creative content to the cloud for us to train on. I don't think we need to do that. We can use smaller models that do very specific things. The challenge is how you get access to them for musicians. So really the opportunity here is to use AI to responsibly and ethically catalyze human creative agency. So final part of my talk. So the first part was a bit of context. Second part was responsible AI work. And this final part is research that we did last summer in rural China. So just a reminder, I have a lot of connections with China and working on the social innovation aspects. And this year we went to a community in rural China that makes this very unusual kind of embroidery. And I've been going there for maybe 10 years or something. And this year when we went there and talked with them, they were interested in how they could use AI to help them innovate the styles of their embroidery. So they suffer from the typical rural challenge that all the older people and the experts are getting older. All the people who are middle-aged have gone to the factories to earn money, the cities to earn money, and all the younger people don't care about the old designs. And so the older generation was like, how can we actually innovate with our crafts? So this is what their typical embroidery looks like. And this would be a skirt that they would wear maybe for a wedding. And it's a very long wraparound skirt. Maybe it would take a year to embroider. And so they started to create these smaller items that were sort of inspired by their traditional designs. And they would sell these locally and maybe also to tourists. And then some of them started using Chinese generative AI to try and innovate their patterns to make more interesting patterns. So they would go on their app and try and come up with some new patterns or designs. But what they tended to find was when they were using these online tools, online design tools or online generation tools, the imagery that came back was very much simpler and very much essentially Western style, let's call it, aesthetic than what they had in their traditional style. So they became essentially frustrated with this mismatch. They want to do some innovation. They want to make something that's new and fresh and that will attract tourists and younger people to the embroidery. But the things that are being that they can get hold of in terms of designs become very disconnected from their aesthetic. So we did a survey of, okay, what kind of ways do people use generative AI in craft and intangible cultural heritage? And it seems that either people were fine-tuning generative AI to generate high-quality images, so like really nice, beautiful designs in a particular style, or they were using generic Gen AI like Midjourney or Stable Diffusion or something, combined with craft skills to make physical artifacts. So to me, that meant either they were going the fine-tuned way, where they have a high fit to the intangible cultural heritage and they're making these large images, or there was a low fit to the intangible cultural heritage, small images, and they were doing embodied practice, like they were doing pottery or metalwork, that kind of thing. And they were using it for inspiration. And then in the bottom corner, you've just got generative AI like Stable Diffusion, which makes some images, but they don't really relate to your cultural content. So my question was, oh, what's up in this space? What about if we fine-tune some generative AI models and we use that in embodied practice? How do people respond to that? What kind of things do they make? So we worked with 8 local participants from different age groups. So we had the super experts, 66-year-old Tang Mei, who's the most expert person. Then we had people who were around 40, 50-year-old who were official inheritors, so that government sponsored inheritors, essentially, clothing shop owners, and then younger people who were looking to think about how they could reimagine some of their local culture. And we had a 6-month project. So we started off with collecting some initial generative data sets for training generative AI, building the data sets, and then going to the village, the whole team going to the village to actually do some generative AI creative practice. And then the embroiderers sewed their pieces to reflect on the embodied practice. So we had a very small training data set. We only were able to get access to 152 labeled images of different elements, which obviously is not enough for a mass training. So we used those to train 4 different LoRAs. So we had different kinds of aspects of the designs that each LoRa would work on. So we might have sub-patterns, core patterns, sort of geometric outlining, and then we combine them together using another sub-pattern LoRa to make it become a sort of maximalist type design. And then we developed 3 different country UIA workflows that we could use on a laptop that we could take to rural China. So we have text-to-image workflow, image-to-image, where you upload an image and then it generates a sort of local style version. And then a region-to-image, where a lot of research is talking about, you need to be able to define regions where certain elements are. So you would have a bird in the middle, and then grass on the ground, and maybe clouds in the sky. So we created a region-to-image version. And then we spent 2 weeks in rural China working with the embroiderers. They would come up with some ideas of what they wanted. We would work together to generate the image, and then they would embroider it over a week. And so we have a short video. This now.
一个举着镜子，一个就
给他多点那个镜子吧。
这里修一个小的
小兔子画一个小，
画一个小的。
你从这个鼻子，去哪里就慢慢的要。
哦，你感觉基本上修的差不多了呀？
反正就是要让它这个不要超出这块布了。
所以你就相当于是下面
这个其实也可以调到裙子上，它只是不要调成3整排的那种，它就可以有很多个形状，有这一只是朝这个。
它是8个花，但是它那个8个花就是 他说的那个图案就比较复杂，但是我没时间，我把它是摘个剪那个拔个花，那这么密的话，那肯定。因为下面那个是我编的，他以为人这个他拿去，我不想我跟他穿衣袖的也一样的，我儿子他就是有这样的。
Okay. Oops. Yeah, so by the end of the project, they'd made 8 small embroidery pieces, which responded to what they were trying to do at the time. So, for example, it's quite small, but at the bottom here, Tang Mei, like I said, she was the expert, and she was embroidering a 12 animal zodiac embroidery piece, and she was having trouble with the pig. So she was like, I find it really hard to embroider the pig, even though I've got 40 years of experience embroidering, and because the head is really awkward to get. So we spent like a whole afternoon working with her to generate an image of a pig that she felt would be the representative pig in her culture, but also had the right facial expression, which she said was very hard to find. So that process of sort of co-creating with the generative AI, I think, is what makes these sort of small models, local models important, because you could just make a book of pictures, right? You don't need to have a generative AI system. But the amount of time that we spent trying to find the right orientation for the pig and the right sort of expression that it had, you wouldn't, there'd be too many pictures that you'd need in a book. So being able to have that iterative process, I think, was what was important there. So we asked them so we did some evaluation of our generative AI model, right? And we looked at a set of ratings of, for example, what they thought about the pattern nesting, the symbolic accuracy, whether it was visually appealing, and so on. And what we found was that the image to image, so the region to image one, the one where you could specify different regions and say, I want a pig here, I want some clouds here, I want grass here, that scored the lowest. And we think maybe the interaction was not very straightforward. The image to image scored the best. And you can see here the visually appealing scored quite high on that one. Yeah. And we compared this also to a project that we'd done the year before, where we were using a different generative AI system. And the image to image one scored better on all of the characteristics other than the pattern nesting. So pattern nesting meant that they tended to have patterns within patterns within patterns. It was very maximalist. So we found that this approach using image to image was quite well received. And then we also looked at what kind of forms of creativity did we see them doing. So there's a researcher who talks about different forms of creativity called Maggie Bowden. And she talked about 3 kinds. So combinatorial, so rearranging existing elements together, or exploratory, which is adding new elements in new styles, and then transformational, which is changing a style or stylistic rules. So we went through and we looked at the kind of creativity that people had done, and we saw quite a few examples of combinatorial creativity, so where they take pieces from the generative AI and they combine it in a new way. So for example, here they've reimagined this bit, or here, this is the generated image, and this is the piece that they embroidered, and you can see they've replaced the sort of just stripy lines with a local stylistic pattern. And similarly here, this is the generated image, and they've replaced this flower with a traditional style element here and a tiny rabbit inside as well. So different forms of creativity. There we go. Again, replacing the inside parts with local styles. And then exploratory here, this embroiderer had created this cat, and then they turned it into a sort of pendant, stuffed pendant, which was quite different to what is usually used for. And then finally, the only piece of transformational creativity we really saw, I think, was the experts' reimagination of the pig, because what they did was that they invented a new way of stitching fur, or the representation of fur in embroidery. So typically, in the local embroidery, if you have a furry animal, it would have a big black outline like this, and then little whiskers that stand out, as you can see on the edges. And what Tang Mei did was she created a different kind of stitching pattern to represent the fur on the pig. So that was quite interesting.
Could I just ask something for clarification? So in this combinational, I think, combinatorial creativity, the upper images are the ones that were created, and the lower are generated.
So yeah, it's backwards, right? So this is generated, this is created, and then these ones are the other way around.
Okay. But so does it mean that like the GenAI model would propose some kind of pattern, but then the experts would sort of like bring back some traditional elements into it? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So, for example, this is the generative AI pattern, and you probably can't see very well on the screen, but yeah, they've replaced the sort of random lines with a very specific pattern in the middle. Right. You can see it more clearly on this one. There's the generated in this. So again, the AI was trying to replicate these things, but because we only had 150 images, it wasn't really catching the elements perfectly. And then we did interviews and focus groups. So the feedback that we got from the embroiderers was that they felt that it could inspire innovation within their own traditions, but that their own cultural knowledge they felt was essential. Like just giving these generated images to somebody else, they felt it didn't represent their culture, but reinterpreting it and re-embroidering it was what made it culturally meaningful to them. There was they stressed the importance of the cultural symbolism and emotional expression, and they felt that the generative AI products that came out, they lacked the cultural symbolism. Yeah, we can see that because we didn't have enough training data. But they also said they weren't very expressive. Like they didn't express emotion, and they were like, it lacks vividness and liveliness. And so what they meant by that was often, you generate a pig, you say, oh, generate a pig, but it wouldn't be able to generate a pig eating grass or a rabbit jumping, things like this. So they wanted it to have more action in images than we were generating. And then finally, they really felt that actually sewing it or manually refining it was necessary for it to be authentic. So they have embroidery machines in the village, right? We could have taken the generative AI images and put them straight into the embroidery machine, pop, out of town. But they really felt that the handmade element or the manual refinement was what made it authentic in that culture. So this is kind of comes to the final slide. I was really trying to think about how do we describe this then. So the embroiderers weren't interested in having an embroidery that was super high quality, that would be the whole skirt, that would be everything finished. They didn't want that. They were quite happy with the kind of rough and ready kind of style of objects that came out. What they wanted was inspiration and different ways of thinking about how they could put things in their craft. So I always think about this is really more about creating generative AI tools which support innovation and creativity with traditional skills and values, rather than prioritizing the generation of complete cultural artifacts. So we're not trying to make a whole dress or a whole skirt. We're trying to make elements that would be good enough for them to use for inspiration, rather than trying to be perfectly replicating what they're doing. So that sums up my talk. So I talked about 20 years of art technology research, and then a little bit about responsible AI for the arts and explainable AI for the arts, and then wrapped up talking about this most recent work, which has been on how do we really use generative AI to support the practice of cultural heritage, the actual practical handmade making of these things. Oh, thank you very much. And thanks for inviting me on this day. There's some papers, and there's a QR code that can take you to the paper on the most recent project, but there's also a link by the way. Yeah.
Are we going to have access to slides?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I can give you slides. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think the last one's, I will take a couple out of the last one because it's not published yet, but yeah, it's fine. But yeah, thanks for inviting me on a day that's different. That's really appreciated.
Thank you very much. So thanks a lot. And yeah, I'd like for questions. Anyone like both online and here in presence?
Maybe to start, I would like a little bit more context and information about this collaboration with China. That's a very, very interesting collaboration, and it's not that obvious to have with this embroidery with people that I'm sure are not so much into technology. So how is that you target that, or that came about, and because that doesn't
happen easily. No.
So
in
China.
In China. So for me, it started maybe 10, 12 years ago when I first started going to China for at Queen Mary. When I was at Queen Mary, and we had the partnership.
So you were teaching there in the...
No, so my role was to find new partnerships across China. And one university I went to, they were very interested in their art technology crossover because it was emerging in China at the time. It wasn't something they did. So they wanted to know how they could start engaging with that. But they already had a connection with the village. They've been having a connection there for 15 years under something called the Design for Social Innovation and Sustainability Network, which is an international network. And so they've been doing a lot of work in the villages, thinking about how to make like all things from very practical things like how do we improve the sanitation in the village, how do we rig up new internet connection to the village before they had 5G everywhere. So they had this long-going connection, and they were also
in this particular village
in the region.
Yeah,
and they also spent a lot of time documenting cultural heritage, so archiving and collecting stories about what. And so after I made this connection with that university, after a few years, they're like, "Hey, do you want to come to rural China and see what's happening?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, that sounds great." And I was like, "Okay, I'm not an ethnographer. I'm not somebody who can document these things, but I can do some art technology crossover things, and we can explore what that means in this rural setting." So then it started from there, really thinking. I think our first connection we made, we worked on co-created an interactive performance where we worked with local musicians to create a performance that had interactive elements in it using Arduino and flashing lights and things like this, as a way to sort of talk about what the future of technology and music might be in that setting, And so then we built a makerspace in the ground floor of somebody's house with like 3D printers and this kind of thing. And it's amazing how much it's changed in rural China. So the village here, I went there 10 years ago, and at that time there was no mobile signal. You had to travel 2 days by road, blah, blah, blah. And now, same village, you have like 5G that's better than London, It's crazy. And there's a high-speed train, and you can get there in half a day, and everything sort of changes so quickly. But it is a thing that relies on trust, right? Because so many times they see people go there from the West, outside China, and say, "Oh, that's beautiful," and take it away, and then suddenly you see it in a Nike shoe or Adidas or something, and they don't get anything. So they're quite they don't immediately give access to these things. So one of the reasons we only have 150 images is because they said these are the images that we give to foreigners. We're not giving you any others because that's our stuff, right? So they said these are 150. You can use these, but none of the others. And so that's how it works. Yeah. But it is a long, so the people that are working there from the university go there every year. Yeah, they have a long-term commitment.
So, and is there a continuation? Because I am always worried about, okay, you do this, you are disrupting their things, and then the midterm consequence, if you're, you go and then you let them with the issue.
Yeah.
So what do you see as the positive, negative impact that your project being there is will have, not
so this particular project with the AI, the thing that I think came that they wanted to continue with was engaging with the Chinese version of TikTok. I forgot the name of it. So they wanted to be generating images and embroidery that they would then put out on Chinese TikTok to say, "Hey, we're doing this new stuff, come and look." And so one of the researchers there had been working with the younger generation, just coming up to the end of school age, and how they would be, what they might generate using this kind of tool to create things in a sort of traditional local style, but also very youth oriented, right? So they were doing a lot of things with their names. And it was quite interesting because the traditional embroidery doesn't have writing in it, and it doesn't usually have representations of names and that kind of thing. But they found the younger kids were super interested in it. Oh, I've got, I want to have White Lotus is my name, and I want to embroider that, and I will have the characters, and I will have an image with it as well, but in the local style. And so those sort of innovations, I think, could be interesting. They were also interested in, obviously how they can expand their market, how they can make things that are more appealing to tourists. So, part of our role there is also to say, well, as an outsider, I find this one interesting versus that one, So there's a two-way value feedback. It's not just me saying, oh, give me all these beautiful images, but it's also, well, if I come here as a tourist, I would buy this, but I wouldn't buy it, So there's two sides to it. But yeah, the issue is how to make it bring some value, and I've always had concern about that, and I think that's why, for me, I've always kept one collaboration, if that makes sense. So go back to the same place again and again, rather than say, oh, well, next week I'll go Philippines or something. And I think that's our responsibility as researchers, right? From the position that we're in, which is obviously a privileged position of being able to go there to China and spend all that time. Yeah, I think it's important to have that. What is the value that it's actually bringing? And the value comes in long-term commitment. And I would say the other thing that it has brought positively has been the increased publicity for the area. So one of the other projects where we were doing sort of interactive, the one with the hanging lamp, right? So it's like sort of future product thing. And then a few years later, the British Council were like, oh, Princess Anne is coming to the region. Can you show some local stuff? And I'm like, yes, I can. So then we showcase local embroidery, local craft. We have a little bit, that's the technology thing, but mostly she was interested to see the local traditional things. And then that raises its profile, right? If you can get that kind of publicity going. Yeah. So that's what I see as the value, on the ground, but also maybe higher level publicity.
And did you see, because map this to a music project, like the embroidery?
Yeah.
Do you have any ideas of how you could apply that to the real music community and still make it, valuable, bring some value to them?
Yeah, I mean, so when we did the music project maybe 10 years ago or something with local musicians, they were interested in so they were using keyboards and all this stuff, but they were interested in how they could use technology to make stuff, again, more, how do they call it? More impactful when they were on stage, right?
Okay.
So they wanted to still have traditional elements, but how can they use the technology to make stuff that sounds a bit different, sounds a bit more like what people are listening to as younger people, and it has more impact on the stage than what just performing their usual repertoire, I think, right? So what could AI do there? I think maybe it would be more, maybe it'd be around the variations or providing think about, okay, you've got this tune or this melody that you traditionally use. Have you thought about doing this variation to it? Or how about this accompaniment or something like that? So I think it would be more inspiration aspects rather than, generating a whole new song in my own style. I don't think they want that. No. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks a lot. That was really interesting. A lot of inspiring insights. I work on subjects that I think we have some interests in common, so it's really nice to see a presentation like that. I'm interested in the creative misuse, also the leveraging of the uncertainty of machine learning, seeing how it actually can be used in the performance context and so on. So it was very interesting, like this mapping of the tensions that might exist. That is the transparency versus surprise, control versus influence, the bias versus curation, and explanation versus intuition. I think it's also very relevant, and I also see as much from first-person perspective these tensions as talking with artists and seeing how people could use. This is very common themes that appear, and I think it might be summarized in a way how like perhaps the engineering perspective clashes with like the artistic perspective, where engineers usually have like very different objectives, or like imagine the usability of a certain project very differently than the artistic community, you know. And then the other thing that I'm also very interested is actually the topic of bringing value to the community, and I think this is perhaps the most challenging aspect of it. So I would ask many questions. Actually, I noted a lot of them, but I'm not going to do this. Perhaps another occasion, or let's see. But maybe the main one, or it's half question, half a comment, because I'm working also on. I'm trying to figure out how to think about this creativity in the machine learning, especially in terms of music, but as well just any creative practice. And I have like this sort of impression that very often we are taking the perspective of like the individual. So when we are assessing whether a system can be used in the creative way, we're usually focusing on the experience of the user, which is related to the control once again, to like this inspiration, uncertainty. Then also the aspects of curation versus like using more generic kind of models and so on. But then maybe connecting it also to like the questions that Xavier had about the social impact, I think that often maybe like we don't pay so much or at least in the evaluation techniques or methods or the way we think about these technologies, rarely incorporates this more social or like broader level aspects. So I was thinking perhaps like one of the dimensions in this mapping of tensions could be like the individual experience versus a broader societal impact, because I think that we can think about many technologies, and maybe in terms of music, let's think of stability AI that you proposed as an example. I think I met artists that actually really enjoy stability audio, stable audio, as well as platforms like Suno. Although I would maybe come out from an assumption, because there is also obviously a lot of the perspective on the other side that those are just pure dangers for the creativity and so on. But there's actually a lot of people that make really nice stuff with it, and we're capable of using these tools creatively. So if we assess them only on this individual experience level, we could say that those are great tools for the artists. But there is some reason why there's many artists and initiatives that try to push back against these sort of technologies. No, I think if we can incorporate a bit more of this like broader perspective, maybe it can serve as like a complementary aspect. So then, like in this. So this model explorer for artists, right? I think I've seen the presentation in the AMC last year.
I think so. Yeah, Lizzie did.
I think this is an example. I mean, it's great to have this kind of tool for me from the individual perspective, but I think very often this leader boards and evaluations don't take into account so much. So I mean, what can contribute to the more broader creativity or like artistic communities and so on? I'm just curious if you have thoughts on this.
So I mean, I think in a broader picture, sort of societal contribution, I think the point is really a lot of these big companies are saying this is the only way you can use AI, or the implication is the only way that you can really use AI is to use stable audio or mid-journey or something. And I find this problematic because there are many ways that you can use AI. You know, you could use the small models, you could use the big models, whatever. The issue is that the way that dominant discourse is happening in the general media and newspapers and so on is that, it's all going to be these big models run by big companies. and you have to give all your data to them. And so I think for me, doing work where we respond to government consultations about this. So, for example, in the UK, there was a recent government consultation about copyright in AI. I don't know if you know it. They had this crazy idea that, oh, we should make all copyright material available for AI model training. And they give you free, there was a consultation, and they get free options. I mean, all the free options were terrible, right? And so we could have just gone, oh, no, that's rubbish. You know, we spent a lot of time, I worked with other researchers to write a really coherent response to it, you know, every point detailed, blah, 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 blah. And so I think the reason the government thought that that was the right way to do it was because they've been told by these big companies, this is the only way it's going to work. If you don't do it this way, the UK is going to fall behind. But if, as the UK would give away what is we're one of the only countries that has a net export of creative industries content, right? Why would we give that away? That's crazy. That's like one of our only income sources for the creative industries. So what's my point? The point is, yes, I think we have to engage with these consultations and be, you know, pushing governments and pushing regulatory bodies to say, look, this is what they're saying over here, that the dominant discourse is the big AI models is not necessarily the way to go. It's not the most productive way. Great, it's super fine if you want to make a bit of music for happy birthday for your mum or something. But, you know, there's lots of other ways to use these AI models. And so I felt the same, like early, you know, I don't know, 5 years ago or something or whatever. I felt the same sort of, what are we going to do? I don't, have we got any power to do anything? But there's lots of things we could do. And like all the writers' strikes here in Hollywood and this kind of stuff, and then the recent way that people have been stopping using one of the AI models, I forgot which one, because it was being used by the US military, that kind of stuff. So people just saying, well, I'm not going to use it because actually there's something else they can use. So I think there's an opportunity for us to actually, because the whole situation is still in flux, right? And all the big companies are based on insane investment promises, where they're all hoping that one of them will become the de facto standard that then gets all the money. So there's still a chance, whilst we're in this flux state, to be able to influence policy and regulation and, you know, make people aware that they can do other things, that they can just run it on a laptop. Okay, they need to know how to set it up, so why don't we make tools that help them set it up? You know?
Yeah. But then, do you feel like there might be also a tension between like the industry objectives and the academic objectives?
Sure.
That is, because at the end, if you are to participate in the regulatory process, then you are sharing the same room with like many people that might have completely opposite. And how to navigate this? Because even I think in our context that in the MTG, we have multiple industrial projects ongoing. I think the people behind those projects have perhaps different goals, let's say, like different, they can benefit from different regulations, right? So it can be very difficult then if we inhabit the same spaces, right? To
well, what do you mean by difficult?
We have opposing ideas of
but so I mean, as an academic, we have a privileged position in society as an academic, right? To be able to take a stand and say, for these reasons, these values that I or we believe are important, we just totally disagree with you, and for these reasons. So, you know, it's weird because I don't know. I think over the last 5 years or something, I feel I've become more activist and more about using the voice that we have and the position that we have, which is a privileged position in society, to actually speak out against these things. And we can use that voice, right? I mean, the point of a university is to be a place where we have different values, different opinions, and that we also have a platform that we can stand for. And one of the challenges is, because of what's happening in the US at the moment, in US universities, there's less people speaking out from US universities. So, you know, we need to be, as Europeans, in the broader sense, of Europeans, we need to be using that platform because we can, you know, if the whole European, so think about this, right? So the European Union is now putting a lot of money, funding money, into sovereign AI things, right? So this means they don't want that major institutions are going to be dependent on either North American or Chinese AI infrastructure. So they need to put a lot of money into this. And this also gives you the sense that there's going to be not just a single way to do things or two ways to do things, but there'll be a third way, and maybe even a fourth way. And so the whole, again, I'll just say again, the dominant narrative that there's only one way to do it is just not going to happen. And I think now that the European Union is committed to actually putting a lot of money into developing the sovereign AI platforms, and a lot of research proposals, calls and proposals coming out in that area about valuing European cultural heritage and how do we get that into AI models, how do we have our own AI systems like Mistral and things like this, right? I think that is going to be something that helps us a lot as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. And in fact, related to whether to be in the same space, we are in the same space.
Yeah.
And in fact, arguably, we are funded through their tax money.
Yeah.
So that gives us a responsibility, not just so it gives us a responsibility. Basically, we could argue that we are the public sector.
Yeah.
So as public sector has a responsibility, and we are a little bit more detached from the lobbying. I have been involved in similar things for the European Union, and the problem is the European Commission is so much bounded and influenced by the lobbying of the big tech companies, which have not just the economical power, but the sort of the legal power, the lobbying power to influence enormously.
Yeah.
And so the public sector, like the academia, has a huge responsibility to help the European Commission and the European sector to have a voices, because we do not sit in those places. When regulatory initiatives are being pushed, the academia is not there. Only the industry is there. And it's our fault. It's our responsibility to go there. And it's hard. It's hard. But it's clear that this, for me, it's completely new. This activist frame of mind didn't exist before. It's fundamental to bring it back, which had been existing on and off in different times, and it's very important.
I think so, yeah.
And it's relevant to move forward specialized AI. That is developed to foster specific.
Correct. In this point of view, they're perfectly very relevant, and it's very hard to compete in narrative with these big AI models that basically do everything, and you don't need to worry about
exactly. And from like you say as well, from a political perspective, it's hard to compete with the big companies that would say, "Oh, we're going to build a mega AI server farm, and it's going to bring this many jobs, and we'll put all this money in." But again, I think politicians are becoming a little bit cautious about that. Initially, I think a few years ago, they were like, "Yeah, amazing, we'll regenerate this area of northern England with this amazing AI data center, reach on the hub." And we signed lots of agreements, and then suddenly the company says, "Oh, well, we changed our mind. We're not going to do it." So there's I don't know. Do you know the Stargate thing? Anyway, so I think politicians might become a little bit more cautious now that they realize that if somebody signs a thing to make a mega data center, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen.
But it's still going really slow, right? It's going really slow. All the counterpart is trying to prevent that that company doesn't compete building a general super intelligence. I think the academic part needs to be even more active as a whole, especially in Europe, because in the United States they're not going to do that. They don't have it yet.
This weekend we had this big mega convention of all the left world. Our prime minister is emerging as a leading voice in the anti-Trump movement. And so they had this meeting with all the mainly South America, but not that many European countries, and the visit that they had with the politicians was the supercomputing center. So the supercomputing center, the VSC, was used as a way to express our potential, no, or the capacity that we can do as a competing powers. It's great, but for me at the same time, we have been interacting with this supercomputing, and there has been a big political mandate to promote this. But sincerely, it's done there is a lot of shortcomings on this initiative, a lot, because at the end is the idea of building these big supercomputing centers, worrying about hardware, investing on hardware, and not investing on the things that would help small companies, independent sectors, which I believe, at least in Spain, they are the important ones. We don't have these big companies. So there is very few companies that can take advantage of that supercomputing infrastructure. We don't have the know-how.
Yeah, exactly.
So the decisions are, for me, are misguided in the sense that they're not targeting some of the most important things that should be done in order to overcome our situation. And the VSC in particular is a great example that they are incapable of really supporting the cultural sector, for example. Incapable because of how it was built, because how the funding is structured, and it's very important for our sectors to be able to propose alternatives, because even the VSC is interested in learning that, but they are not approached. They are not approached because there is no lobbying, or there is no unifying voice that would be able to present solutions, not the problems, but solutions, which is what the politicians are.
That's really cool. Yes.
So.
And at the same time, Meta is building in the United States. I don't remember in particular where this huge data center that is going to be like 4 airports size that is now already being built. Have you seen it? It's really quiet.
Yeah. But these in Europe, they are built from public money, with public sector. So which is, and they have the potential. They won't be able to compete with these huge infrastructures, but they are powerful enough, and sincerely, they are underused. So there is a big mismatch there.
Right.
If we continue, we will go to something serious. About the finish.
Very interesting discussion. So I was reading a message on the chat, but it's not a question. So if it's all, I thank again our guest, Nick, for the great presentation and the discussion. And looking forward to seeing all of you in our next session. So thanks again, Nick.
Very good.
Yeah, by the way.